Hi everyone, my name is Mike Cook. I'm a senior lecturer at King's College London in the Human-Centered Computing group, and this is my short vision paper talk, The Art of Programming, Challenges in Generating Code for Creative Applications. So I work in AI and creativity, and in particular I look at AI applied to game design. So I'm really interested in how AI can help game designers in all sorts of different aspects of this craft. And that means that I'm really interested in how people use code in creative contexts, and in particular how they use it in strange ways to make music, to make art, to make video games. And I wanted to show some of these examples here in this talk quickly for you to kind of inspire you to think maybe a bit differently about the kinds of domains that you work in for generating code. So when we think about code generation in general, we think about a certain type of problem, and GitHub Copilot focuses on these kinds of problems, for example. There was a study done to evaluate Copilot users, and they asked them to write an HTTP client. And lots of the analysis of GitHub Copilot and similar tools have been looking at very traditional software engineering tasks, very everyday industry tasks, and focused on particular kinds of languages as well. And this is fine, but it means that we're missing part of the picture of what people do with code. Similarly, the kinds of code that we train on are things from large repositories like GitHub, maybe things like tutorials for writing code online in the case of something like ChatGPT. And again, this is a particular type of code. It gives us clean code, code that's maybe supposed to be explainable, things like minimum reproducible examples on Stack Overflow, which are missing lots of the cruft and errors that often sneak into real code, particularly creative code. But when we look at programming in creative domains, we don't just find a different type of code, we find code being used in completely different ways. So this is something called Strudel. It is a live coding language based on something called tidal cycles. And this is generating audio and is used in something called AlgoRave. So when you come to an AlgoRave, a programmer is writing code in front of you that's generating music, and you're hearing it live, and they're changing it live as well. And this is a really interesting problem for a number of reasons. First of all, they can't just make mistakes whenever they want. They can't test some code and then go back if they don't like it, because they want to try and make sure that the code they're playing produces an interesting experience for the audience the whole way through. They also can't necessarily show you what a finished piece of code looks like. We're looking at this example program here, but in reality, this code will have been written over the course of half an hour or an hour, and each stage of that code is interesting and meaningful in its own way as well. So it's not a case that we can just go to a repository and find finished live code examples, because this is something which is done dynamically. Similarly, generative art is often done in an iterative process, so lots of automated coding systems require you to ask for something or provide a type signature, something like that. But when you look at generative art, it's often done in an iterative way of seeing what will happen if they write code in a particular way. And you can see here how the user is going back and forth between their code and the output. So again, they're working with code in a completely different setting. Similarly, failure works very differently in creative settings too. So bugs are often not a problem. Safety critical concerns are often not a concern for something like art or music, but failure can creep in different ways. So in video games, for example, there can be a mismatch between what the code is doing and what the player thinks is happening. So if we watch this example from a game called Discroom, an AI code system that I've written called Pixie has invented a new mechanic where these red discs get bigger every time they bounce off the wall. But the actual part that kills the player does not get any bigger, so they look much more dangerous than they are, which might be confusing or frustrating to a human player. So again, failure means something different in creative contexts as well. This is a very short talk for a very short paper about a very big topic, but I just wanted to close by saying that programming in creative fields is really, really interesting, and creative coders in general are some of the coolest and most interesting people I've ever worked with. You also need to be prepared that they will have real concerns about some of your work, particularly if you work with LLMs. I don't, but if you do, you might need to kind of work with them and find compromises so that you can kind of listen to the concerns they have about some of that technology. But it's really worth it because this space has incredible research problems in and really, really kind and interesting people to work with too. Thanks so much for listening to this talk. If you want to find out more about any of my work, you can go to possibilityspace.org, or you can drop me a line on social media or via email. I also have some games that I've made, as well as some that my AI have made online as well. And you can find some of my wonderful creative collaborators and students, many of whom are designers and artists themselves, at some of these links at the bottom as well. Thanks so much for listening.